the psychics, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. Every one of those groups or mystics say that Atlantis was a historical reality. There was a cataclysm that destroyed it. Humans were originally androgynous, a byproduct of genetic engineering. Athens in 9000 BC
was bedrock.
There's no evidence that it was advanced culture.
Right.
So it's like that feeds into like, is this a noble lie or not? You know, is this an allegory?
Right.
And he did he did operate like that. And, you know, these ideas that, excuse me, just because Plato said it doesn't make it factual. It could be like, this might be worthy of further investigation. That's what I would say. The idea intrigues me. Let's see. I would say that there are other sources that talk about, you know, like the Tuatha De Danann show up from four islands, four Atlantic islands, and they show up in ancient Ireland, and these supernatural beings. And you have these stories of lost worlds and gods, and the Ogdoad and the Ennead in Egypt. And at the temple of Edfu, you have the building text, right? I saw you talking about the building text, right? So I reached out to Mano Safesadeh, who was translating them from German to English. Now, Dieter Kurth is a doctor who since 1986 has been translating the building text of Edfu into German, right? And the old French translations leave a lot to be desired. So Manu is friends with Dr. Dieter Kurth and interfaces with them, has them over for dinner, and he's taken these incredible texts and he's translating them now into English. So I just spoke at the KC conference with Manu, and I'm friends with him. Oh, wow. And I asked him about this dynamic of like, is Hancock's version of the Edfu text kind of a patchwork of wishful thinking? And he said, no, he got it right stunningly, because they're very difficult to translate. Ptolemaic hieroglyphs are very, very difficult in context, are very difficult to understand. But he said, you can believe it or not, but these writings about the primeval land and the land of the gods and the first time, they are claiming that there was this lost island of the gods that was destroyed in the flood.
In the Edfu text.
In the Edfu text.
And when were the Edfu texts written?
It was a Ptolemaic temple, so 200 BC. I hope I got that date right. But
after Plato wrote about it.
But no, the traditions go way, way back. They're oral traditions carried and written down. And like the pyramid texts of Unis are super ancient, but they're even from more ancient traditions. And I will say Homer talked about Ogygia. That's his Atlantis.
Ogygia?
Ogygia. In the middle of the Atlantic.
Ogygia.
Yes, Ogygia. The Ogyggian flood Plato talked about in Laws, Book 3. And he says it was 10,000 years before the invention of writing and music. So the date is like 10,600 BC that Plato points to for the time of the Ogyggian flood. And Plutarch, and there's another geographer who's escaping my attention now, said that Ogygia lay 5 days west of England in the middle of the Atlantic. That they pinpointed this Ogyggian paradise in the middle of the Atlantic.
Oh, there we go. Ogyggian flood is a flood in ancient Greek mythology that occurred during the region of Ogyges, a mythical king of Attica and Boeotia. Oh.
Fact checked in real time.
Yeah, look at that.
Community notes.
Interesting. It says survivors moved to Egypt, which was called Ogygia.
Can you scroll down a little bit more so we can see like a timeline maybe, or like dates?
Ogyges. What happened to Ogygia?
Click on the Wikipedia.
Plato gives it a date of like 10,600 BC, I believe.
Oh, okay.
In Laws 3. It's for Homer, it's this this age of the gods, this ancient time. One thing I find interesting is like, we have a cold case, right? The science, anthropology, archaeology, they're a different kind of science. It's not like biomedicine
right.
or physics or math where you can keep repeating the same.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So it's a more ephemeral, difficult science. And that's not to disparage professionals, because it's really hard. So you got to find a new site. You got to carbon test. You got to have things in context.
Right.
There's a lot to it.
Yes.
Excuse me. So I, being the weirdo that I am, and I'm willing to go anywhere for a good story, and I bring in the clairvoyants, the psychics, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. And what's stunning is every one of those groups or mystics say that Atlantis was a historical reality. There was a cataclysm that destroyed it. Humans were originally androgynous, a byproduct of genetic engineering by
What does that word mean, androgynous?
Sexless beings, you know, kind of like my love life. It's like it's either possessing two sets of sexual organs or none. You know, it's really it's weird. Even Plato says, you know, Aristophanes displays the myth of the ancient androgen, and Zeus cuts us down the middle. We were first androgynous. Plato talks about it. Plato talks about Atlantis as a historical reality. Plato talks about the immortality of the soul. So all these psychics are claiming the same strange and specific thing. And you could say, maybe they just took information from each other, but it's like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, they're kind of like tight to the vest with their info, you know? You read through their documents, you talk to people who are Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and they're like, they believe all their esoteric wisdom flows back through Egypt to Atlantis. So that's just interesting. So I'm open to these ideas. To get back to Ogygia, Madame Blavatsky said that Homer was correct. He was the first one. The Bard of Ulysses understood that Ogygia was Atlantis. You know, so there's other. You could say I don't believe in Atlantis. The Aztecs call it Aztlan. You know, all these indigenous people have beliefs about a lost continent, Lemuria in the Pacific, Atlantis. I could get into plate tectonics and that it might be somewhat of a flawed theory, but I don't want to because it's a long. I'm just saying, be open to the idea.
Right.
And as a professional, it's like, you know, this is what I need. You know, we got to go over the mid-Atlantic range and we got to find this, and this is the evidence I need. And, you know, I'll reference, you know, I'm not here fighting a proxy war for Graham Hancock. I like Graham a lot.
Yeah.
And he's the one who got me into like ayahuasca, so I'm indebted to him. And he's just pushing boundaries. He's a maverick, and he's looking for, you know, Atlantis and this lost race, and that's cool. Because a lot of the mystics of old, like Plato, you ever wonder why his work is like almost so flawless? Albert North Whitehead says, Western thought is a series of footnotes to Plato. You know, Plato was a genius, Pythagoras.
Yeah,
because
and Aristotle.
Aristotle, the scientists of old were a blend of spiritual, how do I say it? They were spiritual scientists.
Yeah.
They engaged.
They were all doing drugs,
They were
man.
all doing like ethnogens. They were engaging in rituals. They were liberating themselves from the false self, from the judgments and the ego self. So thus they were well prepared and objective to take on both sides of the street, the invisible realms and the visible realms. And, you know, so it's like they did that. So the scientists of today would be, it would be helpful. Like I say, skeptics are more afraid of ayahuasca than they are Atlantis. You know, I know I'm being a wise guy, but, and I don't even want to diss anyone. I'm just saying, like, you know, you might want to mix in a little plant medicine ceremony or some metaphysical, usually like when you have trauma or somebody you love dies or some crazy happens, you get a portal into the other realm, you know? So some people get it that way. It's like, it shouldn't have to happen that way to see through the veil of this matrix, you know?